We want to welcome everyone. This is the first in our series of Solvable New Works presentations, and we're very honored that you are here with us. Today, we're here to discuss sustainable leadership, and I'm joined by my two colleagues. Here, May is my colleague from Solvable, and also we're joined by Andrew Hoffman, who is the Holcim Professor of Sustainable Enterprise at the University of Michigan. Andy is a leading thinker in the field of sustainable business, and he's authored 18 books and over 100 articles and book chapters. We'll be discussing one of his two new books that were released simultaneously, and we're going to be discussing management as a calling, although we will be discussing a lot of his contributions more generally. Something that really struck me, Andy, when in reading Management as a Calling, you had suggested that if there are no solutions coming from business, there will be no solutions. This does not mean that only business can generate solutions, but with its extraordinary powers of ideation, production, and distribution, business is best positioned to bring the change we need at scale at which we need it. Solutions will not be as visionary, transformative, or rapid as our world requires unless we change the business culture that produces them. So my question is, for those participants who might be skeptical of the significance of business and the market in this transition to a more sustainable future, how would you allay their skepticism?
I wouldn't. I would say stay skeptical. But my approach to this is very pragmatic. The problems that we're facing today, whether we're talking about climate change or income inequality, these are problems created by the market. And if we're going to solve them, the market has to solve them. The market is the most powerful institution on earth. And I should say that what precedes that segment you read states that. We're talking about the market. And the market includes business, government, civil society. We are all part of the market, whether we buy goods and services, whether we invest in our money. In all ways, the market is the most powerful orienting force on earth. Business is the most powerful entity within it. You can lament that fact, but it is a fact. And so if we're going to solve these problems, the market has to shift and business has to solve them. Business will create the next drivetrain under the hood of your car, the next kind of mobility we enjoy, the food we eat, the buildings we live and work in. It all comes from the market. It all comes from business. It doesn't mean government has no role. I think that government needs to be elevated in its importance in driving the market, but we need to shift the market towards solving these problems. I mean, there are people out there, Naomi Klein, saying that we need to shred the market and come up with a new system. And that's just something that no one in human history has ever had the opportunity to do. You can never just wipe the slate clean and come up with a new system. If you want to, when we talk about vision in an organization, it has to have three parts: a desired future, clear statement of reality, path to get from one to the other. If we want a system that solves climate change, income inequality, things like that, that's a nice future. We have to recognize where we are right now and figure out how to get from here to there. And so that's the central element. It's just a pragmatic approach. It's the only way we're going to be able to solve these issues.
How do we, I guess from a cultural perspective, how do we hold all three of those things simultaneously? And now we very much, it seems like the nomenclature of transition is being accepted. We're now seeing, in federal governments talking about transition and recognizing the importance of it. How do we kind of run while we still have the same culture in place and move rapidly? I mean, it's one of the things that we talked about, which is the urgency of this transition, which I think transition in some cases is, transition is almost too benign of a term for what we're actually trying to achieve.
When I think about transition, I think about incremental change. When I think about transformation, I think about fundamental change. And systems, organizational, institutional systems, the market, society, it can change transitionally, incrementally, but it can also change suddenly in response to a sudden event or stimulus. And so it can have a step function. And we will have those step functions, whether you like it or not. I mean, we can ignore climate change. It will precipitate an event that will cause a step change. We're in one right now with COVID. Prior to COVID, the problems were being articulated. There was a statistic from the Federal Reserve before COVID happened that 40% of Americans could not pull together $400 in an emergency. They're in that emergency right now. So we have record numbers of unemployment, while the stock market is booming, and Jeff Bezos is poised to be the world's first trillionaire. There is a systemic problem, needs a systemic correction. So maybe it's a fair question or criticism that change won't be fast enough, but what alternative is there? You can't just shred the system and come up with something new. That's just not an option before us. We're going to roll up our sleeves and figure out how to change the system. And to my mind, the conversation's been engaged. There's a lot of questions now around the shareholder primacy model, the purpose of the corporation. Ask anyone, I could walk out in the street, finish this sentence. The purpose of the corporation is, and they will say, to make money for the shareholder. It's actually not true. That question has been engaged. The Business Roundtable, the World Economic Forum, the CEO of BlackRock coming out and saying that, no, the corporation has a responsibility to society, to other stakeholders that are out there, to the environment, and to the cynics out there, stay cynical. Those are aspirational statements. And if you look at, for example, members of the Business Roundtable, what have they changed since that statement? Not a heck of a lot. And so there's an expression, I think Dow said it, don't trust us, track us. And so I would say, track them, push it. You said it, now what does it mean and how we go forward? Similarly on climate change. You know, up until the early 2000s, the conversation in the corporate sector was carbon reduction. And now the conversation is carbon neutral and even carbon negative. Now, there's a lot of greenwashing going on out there, a lot of companies saying they're going to do that and they're not, but a lot of companies really tend to tackle that question. And that to me is a great example, because to go carbon neutral requires a totally different way of thinking than just reducing carbon. I can reduce this carbon in this house by screwing in some LED light bulbs, turning my thermostat down, insulating the walls. If I want to go carbon neutral, I have to really think differently about what this house is, how I use it, how it was built, especially if we start to expand out in the supply chain. So I think the conversation's been engaged. Let's all engage it and push it forward to say, how does the system have to change?
And I think we also are seeing both a mental shift as well as a language shift around regenerative leadership. And there's lots of talk about, you know, even moving beyond the net zero to then zero to thinking about our role in a regenerative, as regenerative actors. And I'm curious from your perspective, how, you know, it's one thing for, you know, to have spaces like this, there are just spaces of dialogue, and then you could have those going up to the kind of World Economic Forum type of spaces. And those are spaces where people dream and talk about what may actually occur. And then they go back into the cultures of their organizations, which typically don't have a lot of affordances for the nature of not just the conversations alone, but also the significance of being able to take the actions and change the structures while they're still trying to run huge businesses that have accountability structures that aren't the ones that are about regenerative business. How do you see, I guess there's two sides to this question. One is, obviously you're working with students in the business school to kind of get them early, what I will say, and be able to help shape their thinking and shape their, about what is the lens in which they approach the responsibility and power of business. But how do you also, I guess, what kind of confidence and success are you seeing in the internal ability from leaders all the way to team members being able to create the spaces and make this transition while they're still supporting their existing business lines?
I mean, that's a really great question. And my students struggle with this, and my alumni struggle with this. And there's a concept that I like, that my students like. It was developed by Deb Myerson at Stanford, called tempered radicals. And I find this a helpful framework. She describes how you can have your professional values, you want to succeed at work, but you have your personal values, whether it's around environment or women's equality or labor issues, whatever it is. And if they clash, what do? Well, you can leave. The organization won't change. You can stay and conform. And trust me, I really hammer this home on my students. Stay if you don't actively try and maintain that element of yourself, that duality. It will die. The organization will have its way. You will conform. The third is what she describes as the tempered radical. And so you have to cultivate both communities, both identities. If you care about the environment and you work for ExxonMobil, you can do this. You better find green drinks or the Sierra Club or people within ExxonMobil who care about environment. You better find a community that supports that. Pick your battles. Go for small wins. Focus on trying to be authentic in local moments, she describes it. And so start to grow that side of you. As you start to succeed, you're tempered. You can bring out the radical side in you more and more. You know, this isn't a shameless plug, but that other book that you talked about is called The Engaged Scholar. Now, I got into being a professor because I wanted to have an impact in the real world. The rewards of academia are academic publications, period, end of sentence. And so I'm starting to speak out now. I'm full tenured chair. I'm starting to speak out now and say, you know, the emperor has no clothes. We are irrelevant in public discussions. I'm doing that now, and I've always been supporting that side of myself. And now as I get older and older and stronger, I'm coming out in force and saying that. I'm doing the same thing with this book. I think there's a lot wrong in the way we teach business in the world today. And I want to just, again, say the emperor has no clothes. But it's not a new voice for me. And if you actually try and quiet that side of you and say, I'll wait till I'm 10, 15 years in and have that power, trust me, that passion, that voice will be gone. And so you need to find ways to cultivate it now, grow it, find your opportunities for small wins, find that community, understand your zone of influence, and express that side of yourself.
That's great. I think it's a good segue into talking about calling, which was something that really struck me about your book. And we talked about in advance of this conversation, which was the deliberate choice to title your book Management as a Calling. And so you quoted Mark Twain in our discussion: the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. What does calling mean to you, and how does one discern their calling? I do remember your story, which was pretty cool too. So if you want to share that with everyone.
Which one? Which story?
The construction one.
Oh, boy, oh, yeah. Oh.
Which one?
You know, it's interesting because I've been approached by a foundation to develop an education program to help business students find their calling. And I'm working on that. It's not easy. And where do I turn? Where are groups that have developed that skill? And I think of places like for example the Jesuits. They have, and I want to back up for 1 second because I think that a calling doesn't have to be religious in nature. You can be secular and have a calling. To me, it's a connection to purpose, to meaning. It's really looking inside yourself. It's more intrinsically motivated rather than externally motivated, extrinsically motivated. It's really exploring where your talents are, where your passions are. What's going to get you up out of bed in the morning? It may not be the thing that makes the most money, but it's what you commit yourself to. And it, in many ways, it's connecting to something bigger than yourself. I am passionate about addressing environmental issues. That gets me out of bed in the morning when Donald Trump pulls out of the Paris Accord. I stay in the fight. If I was just doing this for money, I'd focus on something else. And so it's really about examining yourself, examining what you think your place is in the world. Mentors can be tremendously helpful in helping you see that. Experimentation can be helpful in you seeing that. So the story you're talking about, I love stories of people taking hard right turns in their life. Of suddenly deciding this isn't what I want. Tim Hall, who studies careers at BU, has a great story. He says he was talking to this woman in her late 40s, hugely successful in her field, had achieved everything she wanted to achieve, and she was very unhappy. And she said she looked in the mirror one morning and had a revelation. She said, oh my God, an 18-year-old picked my career. At 18, she decided this is what she wanted to do, and she set her sights for it, and she went for it, and she never stopped until she got there to say, is this what I really want? And so the story you're alluding to is I graduated from college. My first job was with the Environmental Protection Agency. Didn't like it. Didn't like government. It's not for me. But I grew up in a family that valued education. So I applied to grad school and got what I asked for. I got accepted to the 2 top schools for public policy in the country. And then I froze. I couldn't do it. It just did. I was really upset, really angst ridden. And at the same time, I'd helped a friend build a deck, and I got a real charge out of it. It was a real visceral pleasure and experience, and it just felt right. And so I started looking for ads in the newspaper, and I accepted a job in Nantucket as a carpenter. And I had to sit down with my parents and say, I'm not going to Harvard or Berkeley. I'm going to be a carpenter in Nantucket. And I did that for 5 years. I built custom estates, and I loved it. And then I shifted and went back to grad school. Your calling can evolve over time. Your calling can change. I have a colleague who's studying people who find their calling in retirement. I just think it's a wonderful idea. And I worry sometimes whether our education system beats that out of people. That come get this degree, we'll give you the piece of paper, and we'll turn you into an employee. We'll teach you how to do a job for somebody else, and that is so dangerous. There's an organizational psychologist who's passed away named Herbert Shepard, and he had an idea. He had a paper called "On a Path with a Calling," or path realizing path. I'll find the paper for you. But the metaphor he asks, "Are you a cormorant?" And what he means by this is that a cormorant is a bird that's really good at catching fish. And the fisherman knows this. And so the fisherman puts a band around the bird's neck and a rope around his foot and throws it into water. The bird goes down, grabs a fish, comes back up. The fisherman takes the fish away, puts it in his net, throws the bird back in. The bird does this all day. And the fisherman takes all the fish. So he asks, are you a cormorant? Are you doing what you're really good at? But are you doing it for somebody else's purpose? And sort of the bumper sticker slogan of that is follow your dreams, or someone will gladly pay you to follow theirs. and it's scary. It's scary. That story about going into carpentry is important because you trust me, not just my parents. I had a lot of friends saying, you're out of your mind. You're ruining your life. What are you doing? You're crazy. And so it really takes a lot of courage, but trust me, when you do this, the sense of agency, the sense of control, this is my life. I'm going to live it the way I want. And don't be afraid to step out what people consider to be the lanes, because the lanes actually don't exist. Lanes are imposed often by people who they themselves are afraid to take that risk. And the fact that you did scares them because it makes them feel pressure that maybe they should do it too. So that's a long-winded answer. I don't know where we started.
Well, we at Solvable often talk about this concept of permission and what we give ourselves permission in order to do, because we may know what our calling is. Hopefully, whether, as you talk about it, it's an experience that you have when you're in your teens or in your 20s, or maybe it happens in retirement, that you identify that calling, and then you have to give yourself permission to pursue it. And so I guess the question I'd like to ask you next is, if we're lacking the scale of leaders that we really need, is it the failure of individuals to give themselves permission to act in the way that is pursuing their true calling, or is it the failure of the institutions, or both?
Well, it's both. It's both, of course. I mean, we are, Americans, I know we've got Canadians and others. Americans like to think themselves the most individualistic people on earth, and they're not. They're not. We are, and I dare say many cultures, tremendous pressures for conformity. Anything that steps out of line is considered weird. People love to pass judgment on others. The path to success, even just how success is measured, it's measured often in salary, size of your house, the size of your car, the stuff you have. And if you can shed that and really focus on who you were meant to be, give yourself, as you say, that permission to take that chance. One thing I think you're going to find out is it's not fatal. You can break the rules in a way that leads you down your path and will inspire others to follow theirs. Again, going back to my own experiences in academia, I have written my academic papers because I have to, but I have taken that work into the real world because I want to. And there's no reward for that. There's none, trust me. At the end of this book that I wrote, Management as a Calling, it's written for my students. That will not register on my annual report, which I find bizarre, by the way. At business school, where I'm not supposed to write for my students or for business practitioners, I'm supposed to write for other academics, but I do it.
Yes.
What I'm finding is that by doing it and showing that I can still succeed in this field, that I'm not committing academic suicide, I'm empowering others to go, hey, I can do that too. And leading by example is such a powerful thing to do.
Yes.
And so if we can get more people that will step outside what they consider to be the norms. I have a group of students right now, I'm advising them. We're interviewing Paul Pullman, the CEO of Unilever. And this is the question we're asking. How in the world do you become CEO and hold these really radical ideas like, let's get rid of quarterly reports? Just pushing the company to be more sustainable. How did you get to the top? How do you do that?
Yes.
And it's really, it's exposing some interesting insights. And when he gets to the top, he made it very clear, now I have to change the system underneath me to encourage others to realize their potential and explore these ways as well.
Yeah, I think the point you're making is a really important one. There was a article that someone shared with me from HBR, and it was a study about specifically the head scientist at GlaxoSmithKline. I'm not sure if you saw that article. I'll post it when everybody's in their breakouts later as a reference point. And it tended to celebrate this doctor. It was during the time of the antiretrovirals around HIV, and he was seeing that it was they were so cost prohibitive that most of the parts of the world that were suffering most acutely from the rise of HIV couldn't afford any of the medication. And he stood out for, in saying, this is not why I created, why I've been spending my career pursuing these, is to have the people that most need our assistance unable to afford it. And it talks about, it's very much written, I felt like, as an individualistic narrative, as a lot of American narratives tend to heroize the leadership of individuals. But what became very clear is the organization shifts as a model of his kind of leadership in the way that he really gave himself permission to be that vocally, and then what that gave, the permissions that were afforded that other people gave themselves within GlaxoSmithKline. He ended up going over to the Gates Foundation, and he was the lead on a lot of their programs. But I thought it was instructive, in even though it's an individualistic narrative, in showing also the cascading effects that he had at GSK and other organizations too, and seeing that it was really important to stand for what you were really there to do, especially for somebody in that kind of role.
It's interesting when you look at companies that have really strong DEI programs or environmental programs or any number of these issues that we care about, what you'll often find is that it had a really powerful, strong champion, someone who stood up and said, we're going to do this, I want to do this. And you need an organization, you need a CEO or a C-suite support for that kind of activity, but it really comes down to one person really driving it. Without that champion, these kinds of initiatives die on the vine. And that's why it makes it so difficult sometimes when it's dictated from above.
Yes.
With the champion down below, and I keep that hierarchical approach, but the potential for driving change is enormous within these large organizations if you know how to put together the political capital you need, the networks. That comes through networks, it comes from people, and building those networks and that credibility is key.
I'll ask you one more question, which will lead us into our breakout groups. Of course, we didn't even get to the amount of questions that we had narrowed down.
Saying I talk too much.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's why we're here. You discussed the importance of asking the right questions. What questions do you feel like we need to be asking right now about the purpose of the corporation that are either being asked or should be asked?
Um, uh, First of all, I mean, just let's throw out Milton Friedman. Let's just throw that out. I like to go back to Peter Drucker back in the mid 50s. And so what I'm arguing here is not radical. It's just going back really to the mid 50s. Peter Drucker said the purpose of the corporation is to identify and serve a market, and whether it makes money is how well it does that. It puts the right ordering on this. I like to think about it if you were going to hire a coach for your baseball team and your coach said, I know how to win games, we're just going to score more runs. Well, actually, no, you're going to win games by building a team, getting clear goals, getting people to work together, build that culture, and then the runs will come. But if you put runs first, you're not going to win. And you can see that, you know, again, coming from my construction experience, I can look at a house and pretty quickly tell when it was designed by an architect who wants to build something beautiful, something livable, something that lasts, and a contractor who just wants to make a buck, flip it, and move on. And so you can see it in quality. Someone who loves their work produces, dare I say, art. And so what do we need to rethink? The purpose of the corporation, its connection to society, its responsibilities to the environment. We need to rethink the role of government in the market, the role of business influencing government. The amount of money that flows into politics right now from the corporate sector is truly alarming. The growth of the activist CEO is, to my mind, quite disturbing. CEOs were not elected, they are not accountable, and they will always have a conflict of interest. Therefore, them weighing in on things like gay marriage or income inequality or the environment will cheer them when they get on the side we like, and will jeer them when they get on the side we don't. And at the end of the day, they're trying to make money. So we need to elevate, reestablish the role of government in the market. I would love to just really change our education institutions, bring the two sides back together. So many of us live divided lives. We go into a workplace or students come into the curriculum at the business school and they're taught it's all about money. It's all about making money. It's all about shareholder value. And then they leave and then they live their lives where they actually have compassion, they have empathy, they have community spirit, they give to others. James Gamble wrote a really interesting essay in Medium magazine called The Most Important Idea in the World. Check it out. And he points out that the system we have for senior executives turns them into sociopaths. I just care only about myself. I don't care about anybody else. I don't care about the community or the environment. He said that's a textbook case of a sociopath. We have to change that. I think it's called the most important problem in the world. And we need to change that. So how do we do that in business schools? I have a lot of thoughts on that, but that's for another day. But it's really getting down to some fundamentals. When we think about issues like climate change, we're talking about a systems breakdown. Climate change is not a pollution issue. It's a systems breakdown. If you're going to fix a systems breakdown, you have to change the system that caused it. We can't get there by eco-efficiency with LED light bulbs. We need to change the system, which means getting down to some fundamental ideas about what are we doing in the market and why.
Thank you, Andy. So I think there's so much that has been said in this conversation that I think will hopefully provide fruitful discussion in the breakout groups now, which we're going to do momentarily. There's also been, I want to just acknowledge, although I haven't had a chance to read all of it, the really great and beautiful points that are being made and shared in the chat. Please bring those into your breakout rooms. I would like to encourage you to, as you go back into your breakout rooms, and you may have a new member or two as things get shuffled around, discuss what are the things that are really sitting with you in this conversation, or perhaps even things that you didn't agree with, the things that stood out for you. And And as this is structured around a conversational leadership, who are the leaders we need, and what are the questions that we should be asking? What questions should they be asking of themselves, and what societally should we be asking of them? I would like to invite Andy to share a few last words before we have our close.
And you asked me to read something from the book, right?
Please, that would be great.
Okay. So I chose this paragraph to try and grab what I'm trying to do in this book. And I wrote, it is my belief that the prevailing business curriculum and its underlying philosophy need a profound overhaul. Our schools must teach students about the basics of business management, but they must also teach them to seriously consider the vast power that they may someday possess to shape and guide our society, and learn the responsibility to wield that power carefully. Tomorrow's business leaders should be taught to do something that previous generations rarely did. They must start to think critically about the role of business in society, their role as a manager in guiding those businesses, and the overall system in which they will practice their craft, capitalism. As such, they should be taught to look deep inside themselves to consider management as a calling, one that moves away from the simple pursuit of a career for private personal gain and towards a vocation that is based on a higher and more internally derived set of values about leading commerce and serving society. It is about connecting your career with your conscience. And to me, that's really important. If we continue to produce business students who care only about themselves, who only want to make their wallets fat, quite simply, we're doomed. We'll have more Enrons and WorldComs, we'll have more crises. But if we can create people coming out of business schools that see their role as service, in the same way that we train our doctors and lawyers to serve society through the practice of their craft, that's what I wanted to bring into business education and business practice. There's a book that I like by David Brooks called The Second Mountain. And in it, he describes the idea that the first mountain is about esteem, about status, about wealth, it's about accomplishment. And the second mountain is about connection, about purpose, about meaning. And many people climb the first mountain and realize that's not the place to be. Many of them get knocked off that mountain. He himself describes how he got knocked off that mountain. Here he was, best-selling author, columnist for the New York Times on the PBS NewsHour, and then his wife divorced him, and he found himself in a crappy apartment in New York City going, what did I just do with my life? So an interesting question, can you skip the first mountain and go straight to the second? In another book, he describes the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And I think that's a nice way to think about it. Resume, success, accomplishment. Eulogy, what legacy do you want to leave? What impact do you want to leave on the world? And some people realize that late in life. You see a lot of, very senior executives, Ray Anderson, for example, suddenly realizing, what have I left the world? I've left a company that is just polluting the world. And that's what I'm leaving behind? No, I don't want to leave that. How do we get people to think about that earlier? And then, once you connect something to people's purpose and meaning, their being on earth, stand back, because they will drive, they will have a persistence, they will have creativity to create change that motivating people with a buck can never do. And so that's what I'm trying to bring into business education and business practice. My book is one small contribution. I just hope the idea takes off, others build on it, and off they go. That's my goal. So thanks for having me, Adam and May. I really, I enjoyed it, and I do believe we will continue some kind of collaborations and conversations going forward, and I look forward to it.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's been a distinct pleasure. I'm just going to share my screen with a couple of closing words, which are, these are Andy's two recent books that he has referenced. Hold on one second. View. And if you go to Stanford University Press, which is sup.org, and Management as a Calling, he has a discount code Hoffman20. You can, of course, buy it from other places too, but Stanford University Press has both his new books, as well as many other ones, including Flourishing and some others that I recently wrote about. The one that Andy specifically wrote about, Climate Conversations. An incredible amount of writing and thinking that Andy has done, so many gifts for all of us to enjoy. So I encourage you really to reach out to his writing. And of course, he's also very active on LinkedIn. So connect with Andy on LinkedIn and follow him there. We have our next New Works series with Sophie Rifkin from NYU Center for Sustainable Business, which is going to be 2 weeks from today on Earth Day, on April the 22nd, same time. We invite everyone to register. The Zoom link is already up on our website, and we would love to see you all there. And any help in terms of sharing this with colleagues and friends that you think would really enjoy being a part of this space, we'd welcome them into our community. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is we're hosting a workshop for those looking for kind of deeper work in this space around scaling sustainability, and specifically, what does it mean as a leader and an emerging leader to create cultures of sustainability within an organization and be able to nurture that. May and I and James Tyre, our colleague, will be leading a workshop on April 27th and 29th. And you can see more on our website, solvable.ca/events, if you would like to register. I want to thank everyone so much for being here today, helping us kick off this series. Special thanks again to Andy and May for all of the magic that you've brought to today. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.